Man, I really thought that we were done talking about tariffs, but here we are once again talking about tariffs. But this is more of a good conversation than the sort of looming anxiety-driven conversation around tariffs we've been having for feels like years. I know it's not been years, but it feels like years. So what are we talking about? If I'm being just real right now, I'm not entirely sure. I'm learning a lot about this as we speak. I've learned a ton about tariffs so far. And what I'm learning now, again, this and everything that I may say in this video might change tomorrow. And there might be new information that might be better information. So just with that preface, the reason why I want to talk about this right now and why I think it's really important is that what I don't want you as a roaster to do is to wait. What I want you to do and what I think is the right move here is to be proactive, to learn, to ask questions now instead of waiting until once it all gets sorted out, because I don't want you to have your hand up and be the last one in line to get your refund or figure out taxes and to sort out, well, what do I do now? What I want you to be doing is I want you to be proactive and thinking ahead and thinking into the future, which is good. That's what we want to be doing. So with that preface, what is going on? My understanding is this: the current administration has agreed to pay back the tariffs that were levied. My understanding is that there's really two groups that are going to get refunds, in air quotes. It is brokers, like import brokers, and importer of record, IOR. If you read through the document from U.S. Customs and Border Protection website, they have an article that kind of outlines some of this, and they note on there that they're going to be updating and making updates to this web page and encourages members of the public to check back frequently. So just to give the brief, deep and brief here, I'm going to read the headline from the Customs and Border Protection website here on the International Emergency Economic Powers Act duty refunds, i.e. tariff refunds. U.S. Customs and Border Protection, CBP, is developing the consolidation, administration, and processing entries, CAPE, C-A-P-E, functionality within the automated commercial environment, ACE, to streamline the submission and processing of valid refund requests for duties imposed under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, IEEPA, as authorized by the court order or applicable law. CAPE is designed to consolidate refunds of IEEPA duties, including interest, rather than processing refunds on an entry-by-entry basis. CBP plans to implement CAPE throughout a phased development approach, adding more functionality in subsequent phases for more complicated scenarios. The CAPE process is being deployed in phases, and CBP will launch the first phase of CAPE on April 20th, 2026. Phase 1 is limited to certain unliquidated entries and certain entries within 80 days of liquidation. Okay, so a lot of words, a lot of information. What's going on here? If you keep reading, it comes down to who's getting a refund. And really there's two parties that are getting a refund, from my understanding: brokers and importers. Now, they don't just automatically get the refund. They have to apply for it, and they have to sort of submit a request for a refund. And then there's sort of a decision period, from my understanding. I was speaking with an importer earlier today, and they were saying it's like a 2-week period. And I could be wrong here, but my understanding, after the approval, it appears that there's a 60 to 90 day window where it will essentially be refunded. But there's this weird sort of language clause information around the timeline of when the tariff was imposed and today. And so there's some things that need to get cleared up. But again, this is why I think it's important for us to be reading and learning and trying to understand this ourselves instead of just waiting to see what happens and then being at the back of the line and saying, oh, wait, did you guys like submit for that request? So if that's where we're at, there's two people that are getting refunds, brokers and importers. Now, are you owed money? Well, that's a great question. And the answer is it depends. So if your importer doesn't submit for a refund, it's possible that you won't see any money. So what do you need to do? What do you need to be aware of? So if your importer doesn't submit for the refund, you're unlikely to get a refund. So how much is going to get refunded? Apparently, it's not just the amount of the tariff, it's the amount of the tariff and interest. So we're going to get the tariffs back, or at least the importers and brokers are going to get the tariffs back. You might get that money as well. The money that is being refunded is not just dollar for dollar. You paid $1 tariff, here's $1 back. My understanding is that dollar that you spent on coffee is gaining interest since the moment the tariff was paid. Which means that if you bought a coffee a year ago around this time, then you would get a year's worth of interest on that tariff. Now, how much? What is interest? Like 1%, 2%? I've seen numbers between 6 and 7%, but I'm not positive. But this is where it gets a little complicated. So let's imagine that your broker or your importer gets refunded the money and they say, hey, Roaster, you're an awesome partner. We're going to pass it back to you because you paid for it. So they say, here's the money for the tariff. Also, there's interest on that money. Here's that interest. Awesome. That's great. But here's where it gets complicated. And there's two parts that are complicated. The first part is that the broker and the importer are probably going to charge some type of a processing fee because they're having to submit all of this information to the Customs and Border Protection to then be able to get the refund. That's administrative load and lift. And now they're going to have to charge that to you or potentially take it out of the interest that you would have gained. So that's a complication there. The second piece that's complicated is that how you handled your taxes in 2025 related to the tariffs affects your tax implication for 2026. So if you use the tariffs in 2025 as a way to reduce your tax burden, now that burden is becoming true in 2026. The final piece to consider is the interest, because that is income no matter what. That's new income. And that is the thing that I think folks really need to start to think about and plan and to talk to their accountant and say, hey, how did we categorize our tariffs last year? So I've come up with a few questions that I think are really important to be thinking about as we're headed down this road. So here's what I think you should be asking your accountant. What is the estimated refund we'll receive inclusive of interest? Now, you're probably going to have to help them, give them some information about this and help them understand like what coffees came from where and how much was the tariff. So we're going to get to like sort of a punch list of things that I would start thinking about now and start preparing now so that we can be proactive about it. But that's one question we get to get answered is what is the estimated refund we'll receive inclusive of interest? Assuming our importer submits, assuming our importer doesn't charge us any interest, or assuming our importer doesn't charge us any processing fee, like a worst case scenario. Let's talk about the worst case scenario. Let's plan for that. Second question to ask your accountant is, how did we categorize last year's tariffs? how we answer this is probably going to change your tax liability. Again, I'm not an accountant, I'm not a CPA, but it is something that you need to at least get clarity on with your accountant so that you can be prepared for it. The third question I would ask your accountant is there anything that we need to be aware of as it relates to this that I'm just like not thinking about? Is there anything that we need to be processing, preparing for, setting aside for, so that we don't get hit with a big tax bill or get just blindsided by something? What do we need to think about? And frankly, you may have to reach out to an accountant that has experience with tariffs, which might be hard to find. I don't really know if they exist. I'm sure there are folks that do work on that. But if you know somebody that has experience in this, leave them in the comments. Let's share some information. All right, now let's talk about your importer. What questions do you need to ask your importer? All right, number one, what's your plans for the funds that are going to be returned? We're sort of implying and making the assumption that they're going to submit for a request for a refund with this question. But that's kind of the thing we got to figure out is like, what are you going to do? Are you going to actually give it back to us? But how are you going to give it back to us? There's two main ways that I've heard that importers are considering either doing a cash refund or a credit. And again, I'm not super familiar with this, and I'm learning with you, but that's what I understand. So it's important to say, okay, so if you are going to issue a refund, what does it look like? Is it cash? Because I need a plan for that. And if it's a credit, what does that mean? And how does that affect my relationship with you, 2, my current position, 3, what is my tax implication as it relates to that? So it's really, really important that we get an understanding of what are you planning to do so that I can plan on my end so that we can make sure we don't get ourselves in a pickle. The last question we're going to ask our importer is, are you going to charge us a service fee for inputting all this information and requesting the refund and going through this whole process and transferring money or adding credits, whatever it is? And if so, how much? Again, just so we know, so we can plan and prepare. What's the next step here? What are we doing? What are we doing? What are we doing? We need to determine all of the coffee that we bought that was tariffed. Who do we buy it from? Both importers and brokers, so that we can start to say, okay, we bought coffee from these 7 importers or wherever you bought coffee. And then we want to pull a report of all the coffee that we purchased during the tariff season, the season of the tariffs. We want to pull a report of all of that coffee, and we want to break it down by country. And when did we buy this? Because the tariffs went up and down, they changed. We're going to have to go through and we're going to have to check and see, okay, we bought 1,000 pounds, a container, 10 bags, however much from X country. And during this time period, when we bought this coffee, the tariff was 10%, 15%, 20%, whatever that is. Now we know for that coffee that we bought, this is what we're sort of owed. And then again, I said that you're going to have to ask your accountant, how do we think about this? This is what your accountant's probably going to want to know is like, okay, let's look through what percentage from each green coffee purchase was tariffed and how much. So that way we can start to build a sort of understanding, a broader understanding of what's going on here. How much were we tariffed and how much are we hopefully going to get back? And then what does our interest look like so we can start to plan for all of this, okay? So we're pulling a report of the coffee that we purchased during the tariffs, broken down by country. Then we're using the harmonized tariff schedule to determine how much of a refund you're owed based on each country's tariff percentage. Probably going to be really frustrating and a lot of work to do this. So it might actually be easier if you just pull all of your invoices. I know some importers were actually adding a line item that was for the tariff for that country. That's probably what you're gonna have to do. You're probably gonna have to sift through all of your invoices to see which country had a 10%, which country had a 5%, which country had a 15%, a 20%, a 50%, so that you can kind of go through and get an idea of all of that. And again, we want to know the volume too of all of this coffee so that we can determine how much of a refund we should be expecting. As we're thinking through planning and prepping for this, one of the things we need to think about is, what do I need to do to help my importer, right? This is going to be a mess for them too. This is going to be a mess for you. But how do I support my importer? So what I would do if I was you is I would go through and I would try to see, what did they say that they would do for you? Meaning if they said, we're just passing this through to you, coffee's $5 a pound, there's a 25% tariff on it, that's what this little line item is. Go through and try to understand what is the expectation that each of the importers that you bought from, what are they expecting to do as a result of these tariffs? That way we can understand there's some importers that are probably going to handle it differently than others. And so it's important for you to start to understand, okay, so this importer is probably approaching it this way, and this importer is approaching it this way, and that one's approaching it this other way. And that's fine. The point isn't to sort of catch anybody. The point is just to understand everyone's probably going to handle it slightly differently, and that's okay. We need to know what each one of our providers, how they're approaching it, so that we can, again, plan, prepare, and be in a good spot. All right, next thing we're doing as we're planning and preparing, we're going to contact all of the importers you bought coffee from during the tariffs so that you can be the first one in line. Hey, I want you to know I'm thinking about this. And let me know if you need documents from me. Let me know if you need anything from me. Happy to support. Just want to be in your awareness. That's what we want to do. We want to get in their awareness. Number 6, the thing you want to be thinking about and planning for is you want to reach out to your accountant and talk through, hey, this is kind of what's going on. These are the information that I have. And let's kind of work through this together. Again, we're asking them questions, but we just want to make contact. We want to be in communication with people so that so that they understand and that you understand that this is a conversation. We're working this out together in live time because, again, information is going to trickle down. It's not going to be very easy to find. If it's anything like the way the tariffs were imposed, it's going to be a mess. Number 7, as we're planning, what are we planning for? We're planning to wait. Just plan to be patient. Your accountant's likely never dealt with this. Your importer has likely never dealt with this. If you're working with a broker for whatever reason, they've likely never dealt with this. And you have likely never dealt with this either, as I have also not ever dealt with this. And so just be patient. Be really patient. Be understanding. And put yourself in their shoes of, man, we're kind of all figuring this out together, and let's work together to figure this out. Let's not just beat each other up because I want to get my refund or I want the interest or whatever it is. Let's figure it out together. That's going to be most helpful for everybody involved. Number 8, as you plan, it's possible you never see any money from this. I've been telling people since, I want to say, it was like the 2nd or 3rd month, and people were telling me, they're like, these tariffs are illegal. And they're like, they're going to have to pay these back. And I'm surprised that seems to be what's happening. But at the same time, I'm telling everybody, expect to get nothing. Expect nothing. And be happy when you do. Plan for potentially getting something back. But it's possible you don't see a penny from this. And that's just a reality. So don't get your hopes up, but plan and be conscious and be thoughtful about this so that you can be prepared if you do get paid back, but don't be surprised if you don't see a penny. Lastly, it's likely to take 60 to 90 days from the approval of the submission, but that's the approval of the submission to the broker or the importer. They still have to figure out how to get the money to you, or the refund or the credit or whatever to you. So it probably is going to take even longer after that. So just don't get in a hurry. Understand that everyone's figuring this out. You might never see the money, but be proactive, be helpful, and seek to find solutions with your importers and with the folks that you work with. Don't beat them up. My goal is to share information and say these are things that I'm thinking about. These are the things that I would be doing if I was you. And I would love to hear what things you're thinking about. And if you have new information or have better information, share in the comments. Let's help each other. Let's figure this out together. As always, be well.